What's up, everybody? My name is James, and I wanted to show you what I believe is the most meta-ready Cosmo build, probably the highest ceiling that Cosmo can attain in the 2020 format. So I wanted to explain my card choices and just how I engineered this deck to be the best that I think it can be right now. So let's hop into it. The first thing that I'll show you is the Cosmos themselves. So I'll do ships. You've got 1 Cosmo Dark Eclipser, 3 Cosmo Dark Destroyer, 1 Cosmo Forerunner, 1 Cosmo Landwalker, 2 Cosmo Slip Rider, and then for pilots, 2 Cosmo Dark Lady, 1 Cosmo Wicked Witch, 1 Cosmo Good Witch, 2 Cosmo Farm Girl, 1 Cosmo Sore Troopers, 1 Cosmo Strawman, and 3 Cosmo Tin Can. So I will explain all of these to you. Just as a basic introduction to Cosmo, if you don't have any experience with it before, it is an archetype from 2016 whose lore is based on The Wizard of Oz and Star Wars. And I just love that. It's so much fun for me. So you've got basically 2 classes of Cosmo monsters. You've got the ships, and you've got the pilots. The pilots all share the ability that at quick effect speed, they can banish themselves from the field to summon a Cosmo with a higher level from the hand. So what you'll commonly do is you'll normal summon a pilot, and then at quick effect speed you will banish to summon the ship from your hand. It doesn't have to be a ship, it could be a higher level pilot, but that's typically the play that you'll make. And then the pilots, if they are destroyed by battle or card effect anywhere, they can banish themselves from the graveyard to summon a Cosmo with a lower level. So it's kind of a laddering effect. They all have varying levels, as you can see. So the pilots will summon the ships, and then when the ships are destroyed, they will summon either smaller ships or the pilots. And so you have this nice resource loop where they constantly feed into each other. Now, there are ways to interrupt this, and we'll get into that as we go, but that's Cosmo 101. So, starting at the top left, you have Cosmo Dark Eclipser. This is a level 9 Dark Machine, one of the ships. It can't be targeted by your opponent's card effects, and then during either player's turn when a trap card is activated, you can banish 1 Cosmo monster from your graveyard to negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. Now, that doesn't come up as often because, as you just heard, the Cosmo pilots banish for cost, and the Cosmo ships, when they're destroyed and you want to float, they have to banish from the graveyard. So most often, Cosmos don't end up in the graveyard. So I don't rely on that effect very often. Usually this guy is just a 3000 attack, can't be targeted dark big boy. And the one unfortunate thing about Dark Eclipser is that it doesn't float to field. Almost all of the Cosmo ships, when they're destroyed, will summon something lower than them. He just searches. So you do lose some board presence there, but the search can also be nice. Next is what I will call the best card in the deck, Cosmo Dark Destroyer. It was limited to 1 for a long time after Cosmo was a tier 1 deck. It's finally back at 3, and I'm making full use of it. It is a level 8, 3000 attack Dark Machine monster. If it is normal or special summoned, you can target 1 monster on the field and destroy it. It also can't be targeted by your opponent's card effects, and of course if it's destroyed it will summon a level 7 or lower Cosmo. What is fantastic about this guy is that his destruction effect can either be used to pick apart your opponent's board or to further your own plays. Because Dark Destroyer can't be targeted by your opponent's card effects, but he can be targeted by your own, as can any of the other Cosmos, so you can actually use his effect to destroy one of your other ships and then float down into a lower level Cosmo. You can even destroy himself. So he acts not only as removal, but also as consistency and searching, just everything you would want from a boss monster. And really helps with OTKs, which this deck tends to do. Next is Cosmo Forerunner. Forerunner is a level 7 light machine monster with 2800 attack and 1400 defense. It cannot be targeted by your opponent's card effects. It is the last of the ships to be like that. The 3 biggest ships that I'm running all have that in common. During your standby phase, you can gain 1000 life points. So this is helpful because a lot of the Cosmo pilot effects require life point payment. So you get out of life points pretty quickly in this deck, and this is your one way that you can help recover them. And of course, if he's destroyed, then he can summon a level 6 or lower from the deck. So this one I'm only running at 1 because it is a light, and because it doesn't come up quite as often. You can get to a lot of these Cosmos when you need to get to them. And the fact that he has 2800 attack is relevant, and I'll explain why later on in the deck profile. But remember that he has 2800 attack. Next is Cosmo Landwalker. This is a level 6 Dark Machine effect monster with 2400 attack and 1200 defense. If a Cosmo card you control would be destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect, you can destroy one other Cosmo card you control instead. So this basically means you get to pick what is destroyed. And that's helpful because if you really don't want them to destroy one of your cards, but you can force them to destroy a ship that will float, or even your field spell, which will also get you a search, you can kind of force them to destroy a card they wouldn't have otherwise wanted to destroy. And then if it's destroyed, it summons a 5 or lower. Last for the ships is 2 copies of Cosmo Sliprider. It is a light level 5 machine effect monster with 2300 attack and 800 defense. If it is normal or special summoned, you can target one spell or trap card on the field and destroy it, and then if he's destroyed, you summon a 4 or lower like all the other ships. So Sliprider is great, and in some formats you could consider him at 3. He's really good at picking apart back row, and in weird situations can even pop your own field spell to get you that needed search. If you happen to be siding Artifact Scythe and you draw it, he can pop the Artifact Scythe. I know Artifact Cosmo was actually a pretty big deck for a while because of that effect. And he's also the main piece of Xyz fodder that I'll show you in the extra deck if we ever do go into Xyz, which is not often. But still, 2300 attack on a level 5 that you can summon really easily is not bad. So that's for the ships. And then Cosmo Dark Lady in the bottom left. She is a level 5 Dark Psychic effect monster with 2200 attack and 1800 defense. It's got the same effect that all the Cosmos do, where you can banish at quick effect speed to summon a higher level Cosmo from your hand. And then her unique effect is that once per turn during either player's turn, when another monster's effect is activated, you can pay 1000 life points, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that monster. So that's a soft once per turn, so if you happen to control 2 Dark Lady, or use the Dark Lady effect once and then reborn it, something to that effect, you could negate and destroy 2 monster effects, so it's basically a walking Solemn Strike. Really helpful, and she's not small either. And because she is a high attack pilot, she actually does help with OTKs, so that's why I chose to bump her up to 2, and the fact that she's Dark Attribute helps. Next is Cosmo Wicked Witch. This is what I like to call the Save Your Life card. Wicked Witch is the level 4 Dark Psychic effect monster with 1900 attack and 300 defense. I know you can't see that, but I have it memorized. So Cosmo Wicked Witch, basically during either player's turn, she can pay 1000 life points, and then for the rest of the turn she can't be destroyed by battle or card effect. So what I will typically do is if my opponent's going to go for game and I just need to stay alive for a turn, I will float down into my Wicked Witch, I'll pay the 1000, and then she just sits there as a big old booty that can't be destroyed. Now she also having 1900 attack does come up because that's a pretty big attack value for a normal summon, but yeah, she's got just enough utility for 1. Next is Cosmo Good Witch. This is a light level 4 psychic effect monster with 1800 attack. I don't remember the defense. So she was a last minute include actually. A lot of decks don't run her. The reason that I decided to was because this is a blind second deck, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But she has a really good effect for breaking boards. She has an effect where you can pay 500, target an opponent's monster, and flip it face down. So a mini Book of Moon in there. And what's nice about that is my opponent has to respond to that with their negation. So if my opponent has an Odd Eyes Vortex Dragon, and I were to target it with the first effect of Good Witch, they have to respond, otherwise the effect is turned off because it's face down. And then when they do respond, I can, at quick effect speed, tag out the Good Witch and then summon a Cosmo from my hand, so I basically blanked that negation. And that's really good, because having your Cosmo pilot effects negated is really detrimental to the deck's strategy. So I like Good Witch for board breaking purposes, so I put in 1. Next is Cosmo Farm Girl. This one is one of the most important pieces of the deck. So Farm Girl is a light level 3 psychic effect monster with 1500 attack and 1000 defense. Her effect reads that if you inflict battle damage to your opponent, you can pay 500 life points to add a Cosmo card from your deck to your hand. It is the least restricted search in the archetype, and even though you have to inflict battle damage and it's a trigger effect, which can be nice actually, because that means you're doing it during damage step, and so you can't be ashed on that effect. Her only having 1500 attack is a little bit low, but we have cards in there in this deck to help mitigate, make sure she does that battle damage. I've found that Farm Girl plus any ship against an open board is an OTK. So, probably more than an OTK, honestly, if you do the math right. But yeah, she helps you put up a lot of damage, she helps you go for game, one of my favorite cards in the deck. Next is Cosmo Sword Troopers. He is a dark level 3 psychic effect monster with 1000 attack and 1000 defense. His unique effect is that you can pay 1000 life points to target a psychic type monster in your graveyard, a Cosmo specifically, and special summon it. So he's a monster reborn for any of the psychic, any of the pilots, and sometimes your pilots do end up in the graveyard. I said it doesn't happen all that often, but sometimes they die by battle, or sometimes they get dumped off Tin Can, who we'll get to. Yeah, it's just nice to be able to reborn them if you need to. So he's a utility 1 of. Next is Cosmo Strawman. Strawman is a light level 2 psychic effect monster with 500 attack and 1800 defense. His unique effect is that you can pay 500 life points, then target one of your banished Cosmo monsters, special summon it, but its effects are negated, also destroy it during the end phase. So what he's useful for is you can use him to basically extend your board presence, because you will bring back a ship, which will serve as a beat stick during your battle phase, and then if it makes it to the end phase, it will destroy itself, and then you get to float down into something else. So it's still a +1, even if you're not keeping the monster that you summon with it, because all the ships do float. If you use it on a pilot, it's not a +1, so I really almost never do that. I've considered 2 Strawman, but given that I am trying to focus on the darks in this build, and the fact that he only has 500 attack, so he doesn't really help the OTK all that much, I figured I would just summon him when I need him, and so far, that's worked. And last but not least, we have 3 copies of Cosmo Tin Can. Even though I built this deck to blind second, I simply couldn't justify any less than 3 copies of Tin Can. People call him Win Can for a good reason. His ability to, in the end phase, pay 500, reveal 3 Cosmos with different names, and your opponent randomly picks one for you to add to your hand and the others go to the graveyard. It's so useful, and it's not a hard once per turn, so if you control multiple Tin Can, you get multiple searches. I really do wish that this was less of a restricted search. It's during the end phase, and it's random, so really not ideal for 2020 standards, but it still gets you a +1, it still gets you to your Cosmos, and if you really, really want to lean into Tin Can, maybe make this a go first build, then you can play things like Call of the Haunted, Back to the Front, just things that'll bring back the Cosmos you sent so that you get even more advantage. Now, I think this is as good a time as any to explain why I built this deck to go second. I actually tried the go first builds first. So I was running cards like Cosmojo, I was running Back to the Front, I was running Storm Dragon's Return, I was running Artifacts, I was running Torrential Tribute. I tried all these different trap cards in concert with the Cosmos, and what I found was I simply couldn't consistently put up strong enough turn 1 boards that it would justify this as a going first deck. So no matter what I did, I would always draw like the wrong ratio of traps to monsters, or I would draw only ships, or just I didn't find a consistent way to draw everything, which would be a pilot, a ship, like a Tin Can, a ship, and some cards that will help extend your game beyond that. And you really do need all of those to justify this as a go first deck. So what I reasoned was Cosmos are very good at OTKing, they're very good at destroying your opponent's boards, picking it apart. Why don't I just pack this thing full of going second techs and try to simplify the board state and just play this to my strengths? So that's my logic on that. It worked a lot better in testing than the going first builds did. You can try it either way, but I think that this is the more successful way to play Cosmos at the moment. Alright, moving into the spell cards, we've got 3 copies of one of the best field spells ever printed, Cosmo Town. We've got what I will call the Power 1-ofs, Reasoning, Emergency Teleport, and Monster Reborn. And then we've got my 6 Pot of Greeds in the deck. We've got 3 copies of Pot of Extravagance, and 3 copies of Allure of Darkness. I'll explain all these. So Cosmo Town needs to be played at 3 in this deck. It has 3 amazing effects, all of which come up almost every single turn. The first effect, once per turn, you can target one of your banished Cosmo monsters, return it to the hand, and if you do, lose life points equal to its original level times 100. So at most, you're losing 900 life points to activate this effect, which is well worth it to get back some of your powerful cards to hand. Just recycling every turn. You never run out of normal summons, really. Second effect, once per turn you can reveal any number of Cosmo monsters in your hand and shuffle them into the deck, then draw cards equal to the number of cards you shuffled into the deck. This is their attempt at unbricking the brickiness of Cosmos. Just by their nature they brick, not quite as bad as Monarch, but they still do need a little guy and a big guy to make their plays work. Now, you can survive if you open only pilots, but if you open only ships, you are not playing. So this effect, it doesn't solve everything because you might draw even worse than you had before, but sometimes you draw the nuts. Like at this past little locals that we had, I shuffled back a handful of ships and I ended up drawing like a pilot, a ship, an impermanence, a gamma, and an extravagance. Like it was just an amazing draw and it completely turned the game around for me. And then the last effect, if this card in the field zone is destroyed by a card effect, you can add one Cosmo card from your deck to your hand. This can happen when your opponent does it if they don't read the card, or it'll happen if you destroy it with your own Slip Rider. So basically, if this thing dies, you get to search any Cosmo card. Very nice. It can even search itself. Yeah, I would not recommend running any less than 3 Cosmo Town, whether you go first or second. So the power 1-ofs, Reasoning, Emergency Teleport, and Monster Reborn. One of the biggest weaknesses of Cosmo is if your pilot effect to tag out into a ship gets negated. You lose your board presence and you're just left wondering what happened. So Reasoning, E-Tele, and Monster Reborn help to combat that. I would say that they are currently in order of strength. Maybe Reasoning and E-Tele could be switched, but Reasoning is phenomenal because if you notice, there are so many different levels in this deck. It is almost impossible for your opponent to call it right, and if they end up hitting a Cosmo, then you just have an extender for free right out of the deck. And Emergency Teleport is great too because it can summon either your Farm Girl, your Sword Troopers, your Strawman, or your Tin Can. I wish I could summon some of the bigger ones, but either way, getting access to Farm Girl right out of the deck can really help with OTKs. Like, you just activate it in the battle phase, they never see it coming. And then Monster Reborn. This one, like I said, your Cosmos don't always end up in the graveyard, but sometimes they do, and then this can just get you right back in it. Or I've even used this suboptimally where my opponent will have a monster in their graveyard and I've only got a hand of ships, and I'll reborn something from their graveyard, and then I'll normal summon a Slip Rider over it, and at least I'm into my engine at that point. At least I can play. So the 6 Pot of Greeds. Pot of Extravagance is one of the most controversial cards that I've seen right now. I recently read an article on TCG Player that said this was the most overhyped card ever printed, or at least in the game today. And I can honestly believe that, because there's a lot of downsides with this card. You have to activate it first, before any other card. You can't use you can't use those 6 cards that you banished from your extra deck. You can't draw any more cards for the rest of the turn. Like, there's a lot of downsides to it. However, I would argue that Cosmo is the one deck in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! That should unequivocally be playing this card. And here's why. Cosmo gets actively worse by using its extra deck. If you've ever played Sky Striker and you've linked from like a Sky Striker monster and something else into a Nightmare Phoenix, you feel vulnerable. You no longer have that recursive team of Sky Strikers that keep bringing each other back. So you're really cut off from your recursion. And the same thing happens with Cosmo. Cosmo has that loop where the ships bring out the pilots and the pilots bring out the ships. And if you go into your extra deck, you are abandoning that resource loop. So you really need to assess that, and I almost never go into my extra deck for that reason. Now, sometimes I have to, but a lot of the times I just play the entire duel with my main deck. So for that reason, the 6 banishes from the extra really aren't as bad here as they are in any other deck, because we're not using our extra deck. We shouldn't be if things are going well. Now, those 2 extra cards could mean the difference between playing and not playing in Cosmo. So for those reasons, I absolutely justify Pot of Extravagance in this deck specifically. Now, Allure of Darkness, also controversial. Unless you are actively plussing on the dark that you're banishing, like say you banish a Thunder Dragon Roar in a Thunder Dragon deck, it's really difficult to justify Allure of Darkness. It has a very low win rate compared to its usage. However, in Cosmo, this card is phenomenal, specifically when you're pairing it with Cosmo Town. Because what you'll do is you'll draw 2 cards, banish a Dark Cosmo from your hand, and then add it right back with Cosmo Town to maybe use on another Allure, or maybe just extend your plays and you drew 2 free cards. Like, it's so free in this deck because you can always get your Cosmos back from the banished zone. The deck is just inherently built to do that. So both of these cards are so good at drawing you more cards, which is critical to unbrick the brickiness of Cosmo, that even if Pot of Extravagance means that you can't resolve a lure, I still chose to run both at 3, because I reasoned, why not run 6 Pot of Greed, even if they conflict with each other. That was my spell cards. Feel free to change them if you want, but I think these are some of the most powerful spells you can be running in the deck. Next, we have the Interruptions. So as a going second deck, you need to simplify the game state in order to actually be able to play your 2016 level deck. So these were the Interruptions that I chose to play in the current format. I chose to main deck 3 copies of Psy-Frame Gear Gamma and the Driver, 3 copies of Infinite Impermanence, 2 copies of Fantastical Dragon Phantasme, and 3 copies of Radian the Multidimensional Kaiju. I will explain these. So Gamma is the most powerful hand trap in the game today. It is one of the only hand traps that can stop turns by itself, and it has almost universal application. Another reason that I love Gamma is because you can actually use it to protect yourself. So that comes up in 2 situations. Say I drew Gamma for my 6th card for turn, or my opponent just didn't give me a chance to Gamma. Either way, I'm going into my turn and I'm still holding this Gamma. Here's what I can do with it. I can lead with a Pot of Extravagance, or an Allure, or a Reasoning, or just any spell card that doesn't immediately put a monster on field, and if my opponent tries to negate it, well then I can follow that up with a Gamma. Or, this is even more cheeky, you'll notice that the Cosmo pilots banish for cost. So what you can do is that you can normal summon your pilot, maybe you attack, maybe you're not doing that, maybe you're still in main, but either way you're activating the effect to summon from hand, so you're banishing for cost. Your opponent tries to negate that. That is the choke point of your deck. So because you no longer control a monster, because they banish for cost, you can summon your Gamma, and you can protect your Cosmo effect from, like, you can protect it, make sure it goes through. So Gamma has a ton of utility in the deck. I absolutely loved it every time I saw it. Next was Infinite Impermanence. This was for similar reasons. I thought Impermanence, while not as strong as Gamma, like it can't end turns by itself, it is still a hand trap with almost universal application. There is no matchup really where it's dead, and I can use it proactively on my turn if I need to. So I really like Impermanence. I thought it was great for the deck. Phantasme, this one's going to need some explaining. It is not the strongest card because it's not a real hand trap. It's not a real interruption. But in this deck specifically, I chose to run it because A, it's dark, which helps with Allure, and B, it helps unbrick your hand. I've already spoken to how Cosmos tend to brick, so Phantasme helps with that, and it puts another body on board to help with your OTK. This one you could argue to take out, but I found enough reasons to keep it in. Last but not least is Radian the Multidimensional Kaiju. So Radian is a level 6 Dark Fiend with 2800 attack. Remember how Forerunner has 2800 attack? That's finally coming up again. Because I can Radian my opponent's monster, and then crash my Forerunner into it, and then summon from deck. And I do that more often than you might think. So, James, why are you running a Kaiju in a format where 2 of the top decks are looking at your hand and ripping cards out? Shouldn't you be running hand traps? Absolutely I should be running hand traps. But the reason why I had to put Radian in is because Cosmo is weak against monsters that are really tough to out. We're very good at targeting and destroying, and if you're 3,000 attack or less, we're very good at attacking. However, if you put up a monster that can't be targeted, or can't be destroyed, or has more than 3,000 attack, or any combination of those 3, it can be difficult for Cosmo to out that monster. Sometimes we even have to go into our extra deck to do so. So for that reason, I chose to main 3 copies of Radian, and to be honest with you guys, the main reason for that is Dragoon of Red Eyes is in the format, and that card almost beats this deck by itself. So I just really needed outs to that, and it just helps with boss monsters. So this is it. This is my deck. It's 43 cards in the main, and then I will get into the extra and the side. So first off, we'll go into the extra deck for Cosmo. It's a little bit strange, and I'll explain it. I've got 1 copy of Mech Knight Crusadia Avermax, 1 copy of Ningirsu the World Chalice Warrior, 1 Nightmare Phoenix, 1 Underclock Taker, 1 Pentastag, 1 Relinquished Anima, 1 Link Karibo, 1 Psy-Frame Lord Omega, 1 Chimera Tech Fortress Dragon, 1 Invoked Makaba, 1 Elder Entity Natis, 1 Levier the Sea Dragon, 1 Constellar Pleiades, 1 Cyber Dragon Nova, and 1 Cyber Dragon Infinity. So you'll notice that even though I'm playing Pot of Extravagance, these are 15 1-ofs. You're like, James, why are you doing this? Why not play some 3-ofs in your extra? Well, the first reason is money. I don't really want to go spend all the money to get play sets of the best ones. And second to that, there really aren't any best ones. If you're playing Altergeist, you're really only summoning like 3 or 4 monsters from your extra. You're summoning a Hextia, you're summoning a Link Karibo, you might be summoning an Almirage. Like, there's not a lot that you're going into, so it makes sense to run 3-ofs. With Cosmo, you're almost never using your extra deck at all, and when you do, you really just want these random tools that might help in certain situations. But I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I barely ever go into this thing. But I will explain why each of these are here. Mech Knight Crusadia Avermax, if I just need to boop over something because it's unaffected by card effects and I have to attack it to beat it, that's where Avermax comes in. With Ningirsu, if I have something that can be sent to the graveyard with a non-target, non-destroy effect, I can use him to out it, so this does out Dragoon. Nightmare Phoenix, sometimes you just need to pop a spell or trap, guys. Underclock and Pentastag are in there for the exact same reason. They both help Farm Girl do battle damage. Underclock reduces your opponent's attack value. Pentastag makes the monsters it points to inflict piercing. So both of them just help my Farm Girl get the search. Relinquished Anima is actually probably the one I make the most because I can turn a tin can into it and then suck up an opponent's monster if they weren't savvy about their zone placement. I use this to out a Beals against King Scarlet. Link Karibo, I've never made it, but I can, so it's here. Psyframe Lord Omega. This will be the thing that I'll make if I'm cheeky and able to summon Gamma on my own turn. I can make the Omega, get some nice attack value out of it, and then rip a card out of my opponent's hand on their main phase. Chimera Tech Fortress Dragon. Cyber Dragon's a very bad matchup for me, so this is really just here to hedge against that. Invoked Dogmatika. This I can actually summon against the Dogmatika deck when they activate Maximus and force me to send cards from my extra to the graveyard. So what I will do is I will send Nova and Natis. Natis will pop a card, and Nova will summon Makaba from my extra deck. So I just got a free negate anything and a free pop, all because you tried to get greedy. And because I have the extra deck space, I will run those cards. Then I've got Levier the Sea Dragon. It requires 2 level 3s, and I can reborn a level 4 or lower from my banished pile, so it allows me to bring back pilots. I've never made it, but I can, so it's here. Constellar Pleiades. This one's pretty helpful. It requires 2 level 5 lights, so that would be Slip Rider. I can make this, and then during either player's turn, I have a quick effect bounce back to the hand. So that's nice. And then Cyber Dragon Nova, I can also make with 2 of my Slip Riders, and then I can overlay into an Infinity if I really need to steal something or negate something. So that's the extra deck. It's almost never used, but they're all here if you need them. Finally, we have the side deck. This is going to change depending on the kind of side deck you like to play, what kind of budget you have, what your locals looks like. But this is the side deck that I chose to roll with for this format. I've got 3 copies of Nibiru the Primal Being, 1 Dino Wrestler Pankratops, 1 Red Reboot, 3 copies of Cosmic Cyclone, and then I've got Artifact Sanctum and Artifact Scythe, and then I also had 2 copies of Cosmojo and a Trap Trick. So I'll explain all these. Nibiru is an amazing blowout card, but only in certain combo matchups. There's some matchups where it's completely dead, and there's some matchups where they can protect against it, so it really doesn't do you much good anyway. I thought it was powerful enough to side, but not quite useful enough to main, so that's why it's here. Dino Wrestler Pankratops is arguably the strongest side deck card of the current format. It has 2600 attack, which is gigantic. It can attack over things, it can pop things at quick effect speed. Like, you always control the tempo with a Pankratops. It's just a fantastic card against combo or control. I think everybody should be siding 1 copy. Red Reboot, like I said, this is a deck that's very adept at OTKing, so if I'm playing against a deck that sets 5 trap cards and passes, I will side in my Red Reboot, and then I will kill them in a turn. 3 copies of Cosmic Cyclone. It is the best generic spell and trap removal at the moment. The deck can't justify the discard for something like Twin Twisters. I don't have the budget for Lightning Storms, so I really thought that Cosmic was my best way to counter back row decks. Next, I've got 3 copies of Artifact Sanctum and Scythe. The reason I did this is because when I'm forced to go first, I want a power card that will nigh on guarantee me a victory. Like, I can't afford to just side in a couple techs going first because my deck is designed to go second. So I want something that if I see this, I will win the duel. And Artifact Sanctum is very close to that. Like, if you're playing against a Dragon Link player or an Infernoble player or even a Salamangreat player and you just scythe them, they're not doing much. Trap Trick can also act as your 4th copy of Sanctum. And then I've got 2 copies of Cosmojo. This one has performed okay in testing. It allows you to target a Cosmo monster you control, destroy it, and if you do, banish 1 card your opponent controls or in their graveyard. So it's really, really great when you resolve it optimally, because you're banishing something your opponent controls or in their graveyard, non-targeting. So that's one of the best pieces of removal a person can ask for. And then you're also going to float off the ship you just destroyed. Now, the struggle with Cosmojo, though, is that it's a normal trap, so it has to wait a turn, and for it to be used optimally, you have to target a ship you control, and you have to make sure you're timing your banish correctly. Now, the more you play with the deck, the better you get at that, and of course, Trap Trick can act as your 3rd copy of Cosmojo as well, but I mainly keep it in here just because I really like the card. You guys can side it out for something more impactful if you choose to, but anyway, this was the side deck that I chose to rock with. So this was the Cosmo deck that I built for the September or October 2020 format. It performed very well. It's still testing very well. I'm probably winning anywhere from like 70 to 75% of my matches online. Granted, that's not all against meta. A lot of that is rogue or even below that. But it's very difficult to combat this deck if you don't know how. But I'm having a great time with it. I love it. It's skillful. It harkens back to an era of Yu-Gi-Oh! That I love. It's got some great lore. It's got some great art. It's just really fun to play. I would recommend that if you guys haven't tried Cosmo before, that you give it a shot.